When the consciousness awakens to the realization of I am, life ceases to be a series of random experiences and begins to unfold as divine order. The outer world, once seen as a mixture of chance and struggle, becomes transparent, revealing the invisible hand of spirit shaping every moment. The discovery of I am is not the gaining of power over life. It is the dissolving of the illusion that life ever needed control. It is the quiet recognition that all that you seek already is within the depth of your being. The mind that once ran toward things begins to rest. You no longer strive for peace. You are peace. You no longer search for love. You are love. You no longer demand abundance. You are the very expression of infinite sufficiency. The I am is the still center of the universe, and as you live from it, all appearances of limitation fade as morning mist before the sun. What changes is not the outer scene, but the awareness through which you behold it. And in that new vision, every form begins to reveal its true substance, God manifesting as life, as harmony, as wholeness. When you say, I am tired, I am poor, I am afraid, you unknowingly claim limitation. But when you rest in the pure I am without attaching any description, you return to the fountainhead of being where nothing is lacking. In that sacred silence, the false identity dissolves, the self that struggles, competes, and fears, and what remains is the effortless flow of grace. You become a witness to life, not its victim. You find that all things necessary to your fulfillment come gently, without strain, because they were never separate from you. To live from I am is to live without resistance. It is to walk through the world with open hands and a quiet heart, knowing that the same presence which sustains the stars breathes through you. You begin to see God not as something to reach for, but as the very essence of your own awareness. This realization does not change the world, it changes the One, who sees the world. And through that inner transformation, the outer begins to reflect the peace that was there all along. For when you fully embrace the power of I am, you find that nothing truly needed to change, only your recognition that you already are that which you sought to become. Awakening to divine identity, realizing the truth of I am awakens you to your divine nature. Life is no longer random or chaotic, but an expression of divine order unfolding through consciousness. Transformation through awareness, not circumstance. True change does not occur in outer conditions, but in inner awareness. Once consciousness shifts, the world mirrors that inner peace and harmony. The end of striving, when you live from the awareness of I am, you stop chasing after peace, love, and abundance, because you are the very source of these qualities. Freedom from limitation, every label attached to I am, such as I am tired or I am afraid, limits the infinite self. Returning to the pure I am dissolves those illusions and reveals the boundless nature of being. Union with the presence. To embrace I am is to recognize God as the essence of your own awareness. You no longer seek the divine outside yourself. You live as the expression of divine life, moving effortlessly in harmony with all creation. Awakening to the realization of I am is the quiet moment when the veil between the visible and invisible world thins, and you begin to sense that life is not happening to you, but through you. It is a turning within, a sacred recognition that your true identity is not the personality, the history, or the name by which the world knows you. Beneath all those passing forms, there is a silent awareness that simply is. That presence, the I am, has never been born, never changed, never suffered, and never died. It is the same life that animates the universe, breathing through you as its perfect expression. When this awareness dawns, a profound peace begins to flow, because you realize that the self you once tried so hard to protect or improve was never the real you. Before this awakening, life appears as a sequence of opposites: gain and loss, joy and sorrow, success and failure. You live reacting to conditions, believing they determine your state of being. But once you touch the truth of I am, the axis shifts. You discover that outer events are mirrors reflecting the inner state of consciousness, not the other way around. The outer cannot define the inner. Only the inner gives meaning to the outer. The people, circumstances, and experiences around you become the language through which divine intelligence speaks to you. Every challenge becomes an invitation to remember who you truly are, to rest again in the awareness that no condition can alter the essence of your being. As you awaken to this realization, the sense of separation begins to fade. You no longer see yourself as one person among many, struggling for survival or recognition. You begin to perceive the unity of all life, the divine thread running through every living form. You sense that the same life that beats in your heart moves the oceans, opens the flowers, and turns the stars in their silent rhythm. This awareness brings with it a compassion that needs no effort, for when you look upon another, you no longer see someone else. You see the one life appearing in a different form. The barriers of judgment, competition, and fear lose their meaning because you know that what you do to another, you do to yourself. Living in this consciousness does not remove you from the world, it transforms how you experience it. The noise and haste of daily living remain, but something within you stands still amid the motion. You begin to meet every moment as it comes, not as an interruption or obstacle, but as an unfolding of divine order. You start to understand that the rhythm of your life is guided by something infinitely wise, something that cannot make mistakes. This realization does not require effort. It comes through surrender. The ego no longer tries to direct life, it yields to the presence that knows the way. In the light of I am, even the idea of personal accomplishment fades. You see that the talents you express, the thoughts that arise, the love you share, are not yours to claim, but gifts of the infinite flowing through you. Gratitude replaces pride, and humility replaces striving. You live with open hands, receiving what each moment brings and releasing it just as freely. There is a deep contentment in knowing that you are not the doer, but the instrument through which divine life sings its melody. This awakening is not achieved through study or discipline alone. It happens in stillness, when you stop searching for something outside yourself and turn inward to the quiet awareness that has been present all along. In that stillness, you hear the whisper of the eternal saying, "Be still and know that I am." And in that knowing, all fear dissolves, for you realize that you have never been apart from the source. You are that which is, and always has been, pure, unchanging, and whole. True transformation does not occur in the shifting scenes of the outer world, but in the awakening of inner awareness. The mind is accustomed to believing that change must be achieved through effort, by altering circumstances, people, or conditions, but this belief is born from forgetfulness of one's divine center. When consciousness is rooted in the awareness of I am, life begins to unfold differently. Outer experiences may still appear to rise and fall, yet they no longer define you. What once brought anxiety or joy becomes merely an image passing before the stillness of your being. You begin to see that the real revolution is not of events, but of perception. When awareness deepens, the same world is seen through new eyes. The problems that once demanded correction lose their urgency because they no longer hold power over you. They are seen for what they truly are, temporary projections of thought without substance apart from your attention. In that quiet recognition, a great peace arises. You no longer rush to fix appearances, for you know that every form, pleasant or painful, is a shadow of consciousness itself. As the light within grows brighter, the shadows rearrange themselves without effort. This is the mystery of spiritual transformation. The outer follows the inner as naturally as a reflection follows the movement of light. The ego lives in the realm of opposites. It measures progress by visible results, clings to control, and fears uncertainty. But once you begin to live from the awareness of I am, a higher rhythm takes over. You are no longer bound by reaction, you become a witness. You realize that every event carries a hidden blessing, a message from the divine intelligence that governs all things. What you once called failure becomes a doorway to humility and trust. What you once called delay becomes preparation. What you once called loss reveals itself as liberation. The outer experience remains, but your inner vision transforms it into revelation. This shift in consciousness changes the way you move through life. Instead of struggling to mold reality, you allow it to unfold according to divine law. You act when inspired, but your actions no longer arise from fear or ambition. They flow from a sense of quiet knowing. The more you trust this unseen order, the more harmony reveals itself in visible form. Relationships become gentler. Work becomes an expression of service rather than striving, and even challenges become part of a sacred dance designed to awaken you further. You discover that life has never been against you. It has always been guiding you toward awareness of your own divine nature. To live from this realization is to become transparent to spirit. The inner light no longer flickers with emotion or doubt, but shines steadily, illuminating every aspect of experience. When conflict appears, you no longer meet it with resistance, but with understanding. When sorrow visits, you do not deny it, but allow it to pass through the heart, knowing that the presence behind it remains untouched. Transformation, then, is not an event that happens once, but a continuous unfolding, a deepening recognition that all appearances come and go, while the awareness of I am abides unchanged. This is why true change cannot be forced. It blossoms naturally as you rest in the stillness of being. The outer world reorganizes itself in harmony with your inner peace. You do not make it happen, you allow it to happen. Every moment of acceptance, every pause in judgment, every act of surrender opens the door wider for grace to enter. Slowly, gently, you realize that the power you sought to control the world was never needed. The world was always the mirror of your consciousness. When the mirror reflects love, understanding, and peace, the images it shows you are transformed, and thus, without effort, without struggle, life itself becomes the visible expression of the invisible truth you have found within. When you awaken to the awareness of I am, the endless striving that has filled your days begins to dissolve. The human mind has been conditioned to believe that peace, love, and fulfillment are rewards that must be earned through effort, struggle, and pursuit. You have been taught to search for meaning outside yourself, to seek approval, possessions, or achievements as proof of your worth. Yet all striving carries within it the unspoken belief that something is missing, that you are not already complete. When the realization of I am dawns, that belief falls away like a shadow exposed to the sun. You recognize that what you have been seeking was never apart from you. The very peace you chased was the essence of your own being. The love you longed for was the fragrance of your own heart. The abundance you worked for was the natural radiance of the infinite expressing through you. In that sacred awareness, a profound restfulness fills the soul. The compulsion to prove, to attain, or to become gives way to a deep contentment with being. You understand that life is not a race toward perfection, but a revelation of the perfection that already is. Every moment becomes whole in itself, needing nothing added or taken away. The energy once spent in struggle is transformed into stillness, and from that stillness, inspiration flows without strain. Actions continue, but they arise not from desire or fear. They unfold from the quiet knowing of divine rhythm. You no longer live as the doer, you live as the expression of the doing. This cessation of striving does not lead to passivity, rather it opens the way for effortless action. The body may move, words may be spoken, creations may emerge, but they come through you, not from you. You begin to experience what it means to be a channel of divine purpose rather than its originator. The mind that once demanded results now yields to the rhythm of the infinite. Success and failure lose their emotional grip because both are seen as passing waves upon the same ocean of consciousness. You no longer ask, "Will this bring me happiness?" For you have discovered that happiness is not a destination but your natural state when the seeking ends. As the awareness of I am deepens, even the smallest moments take on new meaning. Washing a dish, walking down a street, or listening to another becomes an act of presence. The sacred is no longer confined to temples or prayer, it lives in every breath. There is a lightness in the way you move through life because you are no longer carrying the burden of becoming. The need to fix, to plan, to control fades, replaced by a trust in the wisdom of life itself. Everything you once tried to achieve through willpower begins to unfold naturally when you no longer stand in the way. The universe responds not to your striving, but to your stillness, when the heart releases its grasp on. Outcomes. A higher order of abundance appears. You find that what is truly yours cannot be missed, and what leaves was never meant to stay. You cease chasing love because you recognize that love is not something you receive, but something you are. You cease seeking validation because the eternal I am within you needs none. You cease fearing lack because the source of all supply is inseparable from your being. In this state, gratitude flows effortlessly, not as a practice, but as a constant awareness of grace. To live without striving is to live in the rhythm of spirit. You rise each day not to conquer life, but to let it unfold through you. What once felt like effort now feels like expression. You begin to understand that fulfillment is not found in attaining what you desire, but in awakening to what you already are. And in that awakening, the restless motion of desire comes to rest in the peace of presence. The circle of seeking closes, and you stand at its still center, knowing that nothing was ever missing and nothing needs to be attained, for the fullness of life has always been contained in the simple truth: I am. Every thought you attach to the sacred I am becomes a seed that shapes your experience. When you say, "I am tired, I am unworthy, I am afraid," you unknowingly claim those states as your own. You breathe life into limitation through the creative power of divine identity. The words may seem harmless, but consciousness takes them as truth, and the world reflects them back. Yet when you strip away every label, every description, and rest in the pure, unqualified I am, you return to the fountainhead of being. In that stillness, there is no weakness, no fear, no lack, only the boundless presence that is the essence of all life. You discover that you were never the limited self struggling to overcome the world. You were always the light through which the world is seen. To live in the awareness of the unconditioned I am is to free yourself from the tyranny of false identification. The mind has been trained to define itself by experiences, rich or poor, strong or weak, loved or unloved. But these are passing masks worn by the eternal self. When you cease to identify with them, you begin to witness life rather than react to it. This shift is subtle yet profound. It is like awakening from a dream in which you mistook the characters for yourself. You realize that the one who was struggling to become something better was never real. It was only the reflection of belief. The moment you drop those beliefs, the weight of struggle dissolves, and what remains is effortless being. This freedom is not gained through denial of experience, but through recognition of truth. When you say simply, "I am," without adding anything, you stand in the power of the infinite. You do not need to affirm health, wealth, or joy, for those are natural expressions of the divine presence that I am. The moment you rest in that awareness, everything unlike it begins to fade. Fear dissolves, not because you conquered it, but because the light of truth leaves no room for shadow. Lack disappears, not because you accumulated more, but because you awaken to the realization that the source of all already flows through you as your very life. In this state, language itself becomes sacred. You speak less, but each word carries weight, born from the silence of understanding. When you say, "I am peace," it is not an affirmation of something to be achieved, but an acknowledgement of what already is. When you say, "I am love," it is not a hope or desire, it is the truth of your being revealed. The words become instruments of creation, shaping reality through the vibration of awareness rather than effort. This is why the Masters taught that the misuse of "I am" is the root of suffering. To attach falsehood to it is to build illusions. To let it stand pure is to dwell in the kingdom of spirit. As this realization deepens, your relationship with the world changes completely. You no longer try to fix appearances because you know they are merely reflections of thought. Instead, you tend to the inner garden of awareness. Every time you remember "I am," you water the seed of truth, and it bears fruit in perfect order. Health blooms where there was discord, peace arises where there was confusion, abundance flows where there was fear of lack. Yet these changes come not as miracles imposed from above, but as natural consequences of alignment with reality. To live from the pure "I am" is to live beyond duality. You cease to be a seeker, for you have found the source. You cease to be afraid, for there is no second power to threaten you. You cease to strive for love, for you recognize yourself as its living expression. In this awareness, the self-made walls of limitation fall away and you stand free. Not because you became more, but because you remembered what you have always been. To embrace "I am" is to awaken to the truth that the presence you have been seeking outside, yourself, has been within you all along. For lifetimes, humanity has searched for God in temples, books, and distant heavens, yet all the while, the silent voice within has whispered, "Be still and know that I am." This realization does not come with thunder or revelation, but through a deep stillness that dissolves the illusion of separation. When the awareness of "I am" dawns, the idea of a God apart from you fades. You no longer speak to the divine as a beggar asking for gifts, but as a child awakening in its parent's embrace. You recognize that you and the presence are not two. You are the expression of the same infinite life that forms the stars, the oceans, and the breath moving gently through your chest. In this state of realization, prayer transforms. It ceases to be petition and becomes communion. You do not pray for things. You rest in the awareness that all things are already fulfilled in the infinite mind that is your own. The longing that once reached outward now turns inward and finds rest in the quiet joy of unity. The sense of absence dissolves, for how can that which is omnipresent be missing? You begin to live from the understanding that every act, every breath, every movement is the divine revealing itself as you. The boundaries between the sacred and the ordinary vanish. Washing the dishes becomes as holy as prayer. Walking down a street becomes a journey through the temple of life itself. When you live from this union, fear loses its foundation. The mind no longer trembles before uncertainty because it knows there is only one power, one presence, one life. You see that what you once called good or evil, joy or sorrow, were only different shades of the same eternal light. The belief in opposites dissolves, leaving only harmony. This is not denial of the world's appearances, but a recognition of their source. You begin to perceive through the eyes of spirit, seeing perfection where the senses see chaos, wholeness where the world sees lack. In that vision, forgiveness becomes natural because there is no longer an other to forgive, only the one presence expressing itself in countless forms. This awareness brings about a profound humility. You realize that you are not the author of your life, but the instrument through which the infinite plays its melody. Every gift, every word, every act of kindness flows not from personal will, but from the silent abundance of spirit moving through you. The ego, which once claimed ownership of good and blamed others for evil, yields to the quiet realization that all is God in expression. There is no pride in achievement, no guilt in failure, for the doer has disappeared. What remains is surrender, not as resignation, but as joyous participation in the unfolding of divine order. As you live in this state of oneness, even time begins to lose its grip. The past no longer binds, and the future no longer threatens, because the eternal now becomes your home. You rest in the realization that life is not a journey toward God, but the eternal unfolding of God as life itself. Every heartbeat, every sunrise, every breath becomes a reminder that the presence you call divine is not something to be attained, it is the essence of your being. When the awareness of I am is fully embraced, the world no longer appears as something to conquer or escape, but as something to behold. You walk through it gently with eyes open and heart still, knowing that everywhere you look, you see only one life, one infinite, boundless, loving presence expressing itself through all things. You live not as a seeker, but as the seen, not as the worshipper, but as the revelation itself. And so, when you come to the full realization of I am, life no longer feels like a path to be conquered, but a presence to be lived. You cease reaching outward for signs of completion, for within you rests the wholeness that no circumstance can grant or take away. The battles of the mind fall silent, and what remains is the gentle rhythm of spirit breathing itself as you. Every moment becomes sacred, not because of what it brings, but because of the awareness through which it is seen. You begin to walk through the world not as one seeking truth, but as truth revealed, not as one demanding light, but as the very light that illumines all things. In that quiet knowing, you discover that nothing needs to be added, nothing needs to be removed. The outer world reflects your inner peace, and life itself becomes the living testimony of divine order. The power of I am is not something to attain, it is the eternal song already singing within the soul, waiting only to be heard. When at last you listen, the search ends, and you rest in the timeless grace of being, where all is one, all is whole, and all is forever held in the silent beauty of I am.
Most people pray to a God they believe exists somewhere out there, begging for intervention in their problems. Joel Goldsmith discovered this approach keeps you spiritually powerless because you're addressing an external deity who may or may not respond to your requests. The revolutionary truth Goldsmith uncovered will shatter your current religious conditioning. God is not a being separate from you. God is the very consciousness that you are. This isn't blasphemy. It's the mystical reality that transforms everything about how you experience life. When you realize that divine consciousness is your true identity, prayer becomes communion with your own spiritual nature. You stop begging an outside force and start recognizing the infinite power that has always been operating as your very being. This understanding changed Goldsmith from a traditional religious teacher into a mystical healer who could demonstrate instantaneous spiritual healing. The same consciousness breakthrough awaits you right now. Traditional religion taught Goldsmith that God judges, punishes, and rewards based on human behavior. He spent years preaching this conventional approach until a profound spiritual awakening revealed the opposite truth about divine nature and human experience. God doesn't operate in the realm of good and evil, reward and punishment. Divine consciousness simply is, expressing as wholeness, completeness, and perfection. Disease, lack, and suffering exist only in human mental concepts, not in spiritual reality. This revelation came during Goldsmith's deepest spiritual crisis, when traditional prayers failed completely. In that moment of surrender, he experienced God not as external judge, but as the very life force expressing through every cell of his being. From that breakthrough forward, Goldsmith's healing work demonstrated that consciousness creates experience. Change your level of consciousness and your external circumstances transform automatically without human effort or manipulation. Goldsmith discovered that most spiritual seekers unknowingly practice spiritual materialism, using spiritual techniques to get material results from a God they imagine controls external circumstances like a cosmic vending machine. This approach keeps you trapped in limitation because you're still operating from the belief that something outside yourself has power over your experience. You remain spiritually dependent and mentally frustrated when prayers aren't answered according to your timeline. True spiritual practice involves recognizing that consciousness and experience are one unified movement. There is no separation between your awareness and what appears in your life. Everything you experience is consciousness appearing as form, circumstance, and relationship. When you grasp this non-dual reality, manipulation stops and authentic spiritual living begins. You no longer try to change conditions through willpower or positive thinking, but rest in the awareness that consciousness itself is the substance and activity of all experience. The most radical discovery in Goldsmith's teaching is this: there is no human being who needs healing, improvement, or spiritual development. Your true identity is already complete, whole, and perfect, because you are divine consciousness itself appearing as individual expression. Every problem you face exists only in the realm of mental concepts about yourself and your circumstances. When you recognize your true identity as consciousness, these mental images lose their power to create suffering, limitation, and discord in your experience. This doesn't mean ignoring practical responsibilities or denying challenging circumstances. It means recognizing that your essential nature remains untouched by temporary appearances. You begin responding to life from wholeness rather than reacting from imagined lack. Goldsmith proved this understanding through decades of spiritual healing work. When people recognized their true identity as divine consciousness, physical healing, financial abundance, and relationship harmony often followed naturally without human intervention or effort. During World War II, Goldsmith was stationed in the Pacific, where he witnessed the healing power of consciousness recognition firsthand. A fellow soldier approached him with severe dysentery that military doctors couldn't cure through conventional medical treatment. Instead of praying to God for healing, Goldsmith helped the soldier recognize that his true identity as divine consciousness was incapable of disease or disorder. They spent 3 days in silent communion with this spiritual truth about identity and wholeness. On the third day, the soldier experienced complete healing without any medical intervention. The dysentery disappeared entirely because consciousness had been lifted above the mental concepts that were projecting the appearance of physical disorder and limitation. Word spread throughout the military base about this remarkable healing. Over the following weeks, dozens of soldiers sought Goldsmith's help for various ailments. Most experienced significant improvement when they grasped their identity as divine consciousness expressing perfect health. After the war, a wealthy businessman contacted Goldsmith about financial ruin, threatening his family's security and future prosperity. Traditional business solutions had failed completely, and bankruptcy seemed inevitable within weeks of their initial meeting. Goldsmith explained that financial lack exists only in human mental concepts about limitation, scarcity, and separation from infinite abundance. Divine consciousness knows only wholeness, completeness, and unlimited supply, because these qualities define the very nature of spiritual reality. Together, they practiced recognizing consciousness as the substance and activity of all supply. Instead of using mental techniques or positive affirmations, they rested in silent awareness of abundance as consciousness expressing through every aspect of experience. Within 2 months, unexpected opportunities began emerging that resolved the financial crisis completely. New business partnerships formed, old debts were forgiven, and profitable ventures appeared naturally without forced effort or manipulation on the businessman's part. A mother brought her teenage daughter to Goldsmith after medical specialists declared her condition incurable and progressive. The family had exhausted conventional treatments and alternative therapies without any improvement in symptoms or overall health. Rather than focusing on the physical condition, Goldsmith guided them to recognize that divine consciousness expresses only perfection, wholeness, and harmony. Disease and disorder exist solely in human mental concepts about body, health, and physical limitation. The breakthrough came when the daughter experienced a profound recognition of her true identity as perfect spiritual expression. This wasn't positive thinking or mental denial of symptoms, but authentic spiritual realization of consciousness as the substance of her being. Gradual improvement began within weeks of this recognition. Over 6 months, Symptoms diminished steadily until medical examination revealed complete restoration of normal function. The healing occurred naturally as consciousness recognition dissolved the mental concepts, creating disease appearance. These transformation stories reveal the practical power of consciousness recognition in everyday human experience. When you stop seeking healing from outside sources and recognize wholeness as your true identity, apparent problems lose their power to create suffering and limitation. Goldsmith's approach differs from positive thinking, visualization, or mental manipulation techniques. You're not trying to change circumstances through mental effort, but recognizing that consciousness and experience are unified spiritual movement, expressing perfect harmony. This understanding requires patience and consistent practice because lifetime conditioning has programmed human thinking to believe in separation, limitation, and external causation. Spiritual awakening is a gradual process of recognition rather than sudden magical transformation. If these transformation stories inspire you, like this video to help others find these teachings, subscribe for more Joel Goldsmith wisdom, and comment. What healing journey resonated most with you? Beyond recognition of your true identity, Goldsmith taught practical techniques for maintaining consciousness awareness throughout daily activities. The most powerful practice he discovered was what he called spiritual listening, silent receptivity to divine guidance rather than mental planning. Instead of beginning each day with personal goals and mental strategies, spend 15 minutes in complete silence, allowing consciousness to reveal its own perfect activity. This receptive state opens you to guidance that transcends human knowledge and planning. During this listening period, don't attempt to hear voices or receive dramatic revelations. Simply rest in quiet awareness, allowing whatever thoughts, feelings, or insights to arise naturally without judgment or interpretation from your personal mind. This practice gradually establishes a continuous sense of being guided by infinite intelligence rather than struggling through life with limited human perspective. Decisions become clearer, timing improves, and opportunities appear more synchronistically. Another essential technique Goldsmith developed was consciousness treatment for challenging relationships and difficult people. Instead of trying to change other people's behavior or protect yourself from their negativity, you work entirely within your own consciousness recognition. When facing relationship conflict, silently recognize that the other person's true identity is divine consciousness, expressing perfection and harmony. Their troublesome behavior exists only in mental concepts, not in their essential spiritual nature. This practice doesn't make you passive or vulnerable to abuse. Rather than reacting emotionally or defending your personal position, you respond from spiritual understanding that dissolution of conflict comes through consciousness recognition rather than human argument. Many students report that difficult relationships transform naturally when they consistently practice seeing others as consciousness rather than problematic personalities. Harmony emerges without confrontation or manipulation because consciousness recognizes itself as the essence of every individual. For abundance and supply concerns, Goldsmith taught consciousness recognition rather than mental techniques or positive affirmations about money and material possessions. Abundance isn't something you attract or create through spiritual manipulation of external circumstances. Divine consciousness is infinite supply itself, expressing through every aspect of your experience, including finances, resources, opportunities, and material needs. Lack exists only in mental concepts about limitation and separation from this infinite abundance. Practice recognizing consciousness as the substance and activity of all supply in your experience. This means acknowledging abundance not as something you need to acquire, but as the very nature of consciousness expressing through your daily needs and activities. Students often discover that supply appears more naturally when they stop trying to demonstrate abundance and simply rest in recognition of consciousness as unlimited supply. Opportunities, resources, and financial solutions emerge without forced effort or anxiety about material security. The most advanced technique Goldsmith shared was consciousness recognition during physical pain or illness symptoms. Instead of fighting disease or using spiritual techniques to overcome physical problems, you recognize wholeness as the truth about embodied existence. Physical healing occurs naturally when consciousness is recognized as the substance and activity of bodily experience. Disease symptoms exist in mental concepts about body, aging, heredity, and physical vulnerability, not in consciousness expressing as perfect embodiment. This approach requires great patience and spiritual maturity, because human conditioning strongly believes in physical causation and medical necessity. Consciousness healing works gradually, as mental concepts about limitation dissolve through consistent recognition of spiritual wholeness. Many students experience significant health improvements through this practice, though Goldsmith always emphasized that consciousness recognition supplements rather than replaces appropriate medical care when needed for immediate physical safety and comfort. Despite these powerful techniques, most students encounter significant obstacles when applying consciousness recognition to deeply rooted problems and lifelong patterns of limitation, fear, and suffering that resist spiritual understanding and healing approaches. The greatest challenge is mental resistance to accepting your true identity as divine consciousness. Human conditioning insists on personal identity, individual problems, and external causation. Your mind will generate countless arguments against spiritual truth. Another common obstacle is expecting immediate results from consciousness recognition. Spiritual awakening is usually gradual, requiring consistent practice over months or years as lifetime conditioning slowly dissolves through repeated recognition of truth about identity and experience. Many students become discouraged when old patterns resurface after initial breakthrough experiences. This is normal spiritual development, not failure. Each recognition of consciousness deepens understanding and weakens the hold of limiting mental concepts over your experience. When consciousness recognition seems ineffective, Goldsmith recommended examining your motivation for spiritual practice. Are you using spiritual techniques to improve your human experience, or genuinely seeking recognition of your true identity as divine consciousness itself? Spiritual materialism, using consciousness techniques to get better human circumstances, keeps you trapped in the very dualistic thinking that creates problems. True spiritual practice involves surrendering personal goals for the sake of consciousness recognition, regardless of external results. This doesn't mean becoming passive about practical responsibilities or ignoring legitimate human needs. It means approaching life's challenges from recognition of wholeness rather than reacting from concepts of personal inadequacy, limitation, or separation from supply and guidance. The shift from spiritual materialism to authentic recognition is subtle, but transformative. When you stop trying to use consciousness and instead recognize consciousness as your true identity, genuine spiritual living begins naturally, without effort or manipulation. Physical healing challenges often persist despite sincere consciousness recognition, because deep-rooted beliefs about heredity, aging, and physical vulnerability continue operating beneath conscious awareness, creating continued experience of limitation and disorder. Goldsmith discovered that emotional healing frequently requires addressing ancestral patterns and family conditioning that created fundamental beliefs about identity, worthiness, and life possibilities. These inherited mental concepts influence experience even when consciously rejected or spiritually understood. The solution isn't psychological analysis or emotional processing, but deeper recognition that consciousness has no family history, genetic inheritance, or emotional baggage from the past. Your true identity remains eternally fresh, complete, and uncontaminated by human generational patterns. This level of consciousness recognition requires tremendous spiritual courage because it means releasing identification with personal history, family identity, and psychological explanations for current limitations. Freedom comes through recognizing yourself as pure consciousness without historical conditioning. When relationship healing seems impossible despite consciousness recognition, the obstacle is usually attachment to others changing their behavior to meet your emotional needs and expectations. You're still operating from personal identity, seeking satisfaction from external sources. True relationship harmony emerges when you recognize others as consciousness rather than personalities who should behave according to your preferences. This requires releasing your agenda for how relationships should unfold and allowing consciousness to express its own perfect harmony. This practice is particularly challenging with family members and intimate partners where emotional patterns run deep. Recognition of consciousness doesn't eliminate appropriate boundaries or healthy relationship standards, but shifts your motivation from personal need to spiritual recognition. If these challenge-breaking techniques speak to your heart, like to support this content, subscribe for advanced spiritual practices, and comment. Which obstacle are you ready to transform now? Advanced practitioners learn to maintain consciousness recognition during intense life transitions, such as career changes, relationship endings, health crises, and financial upheavals, when spiritual understanding faces its greatest tests through challenging circumstances. During his own experience of professional transition from traditional ministry to mystical teaching, Goldsmith faced severe criticism from religious authorities and loss of financial security. Consciousness recognition sustained him through years of uncertainty about life direction. He discovered that major life transitions often represent consciousness, calling you to deeper levels of spiritual understanding. What appears as external disruption is actually consciousness dissolving limiting structures that no longer serve your spiritual evolution and authentic expression. Advanced practice involves welcoming transitions as consciousness expanding into greater freedom rather than problems to be solved or difficulties to endure. This perspective transforms crisis into opportunity for deeper recognition of your unlimited spiritual nature. In business and professional activities, consciousness recognition creates an entirely different approach to success, competition, and material achievement. Instead of struggling against others or forcing outcomes through personal will, you allow consciousness to express its own perfect activity. Goldsmith worked with numerous business leaders who discovered that consciousness recognition actually enhanced professional effectiveness rather than making them passive or impractical. Intuitive guidance improved decision-making, and authentic leadership emerged naturally from spiritual understanding. This doesn't mean avoiding practical skills or professional development, but approaching career activities from consciousness rather than personal ambition or fear of failure. Work becomes an expression of consciousness rather than a source of identity or security. Students often report that professional opportunities expand naturally when they stop trying to manipulate career outcomes and trust consciousness to express its perfect activity through their skills, talents, and service to others. Parenting from consciousness recognition transforms family relationships by recognizing children as complete spiritual beings rather than incomplete humans requiring improvement, correction, or constant guidance from adult authority figures who know better about life direction. This approach doesn't eliminate appropriate discipline or practical guidance, but shifts the foundation from control-based parenting to recognition-based relationship. You respond to children from their wholeness rather than reacting to behavioral problems or developmental concerns. Goldsmith emphasized that children are often naturally closer to consciousness recognition than adults, because they haven't yet accumulated layers of mental conditioning about limitation, separation, and personal inadequacy that complicate spiritual understanding and authentic expression. Many parents discover that behavioral problems resolve naturally when they consistently recognize their children's true identity as divine consciousness, rather than trying to fix personality issues or force better behavior through reward and punishment systems. Aging and physical decline become opportunities for deeper consciousness recognition rather than inevitable deterioration to fear and resist. Goldsmith maintained vitality and mental clarity well into his 70s through consistent recognition of consciousness as timeless, ageless essence. The mental concepts that create aging experience include beliefs about physical decline, reduced capacity, approaching death, and loss of relevance as life progresses. These concepts exist in human thinking, not in consciousness, which remains eternally fresh and unlimited. This doesn't mean denying the practical realities of physical changes or avoiding appropriate health care, but recognizing that your essential identity remains unaffected by temporal changes in bodily appearance and physical capacity. Students often report increased energy and improved health when they stop identifying with aging concepts and consistently recognize consciousness as the ageless substance of their being. Physical improvements often follow naturally without forced effort to reverse aging process. Death loses its terror when understood as the dissolution of mental concepts, rather than the ending of consciousness. Goldsmith's final years demonstrated complete peace about transitional processes because he recognized consciousness as eternal, indestructible spiritual reality. This understanding transforms grief and loss by recognizing that consciousness cannot be destroyed or separated. What appears as death is simply the release of limiting concepts that temporarily obscured recognition of eternal spiritual identity. Fear of death creates much human suffering and drives desperate attempts to extend physical life or achieve immortality through material means. Recognition of consciousness as your true identity resolves death anxiety naturally without denial or spiritual bypassing. Many students report profound peace about mortality questions when they deeply recognize consciousness as their essential nature. This recognition doesn't eliminate natural sadness about loss, but removes the terror that often accompanies thoughts about physical death. Global challenges such as war, environmental destruction, and social injustice appear differently from consciousness recognition. Instead of feeling overwhelmed by world problems or politically divided about solutions, you recognize consciousness as the only true power operating. This doesn't create passive indifference to human suffering or social responsibility, but establishes spiritual foundation for effective action. When you respond to global challenges from consciousness rather than personal outrage or political ideology, your contribution becomes more unified and healing. Goldsmith taught that consciousness recognition by even small numbers of people creates invisible spiritual influence that contributes to planetary harmony and peace. Individual spiritual understanding has collective impact beyond immediate personal circles. Students often discover that their social and environmental concerns are addressed more effectively when approached from consciousness recognition rather than emotional reaction or political activism based on mental concepts about good and evil forces. Teaching and sharing consciousness recognition requires great spiritual maturity because you must resist the temptation to convert others or prove spiritual truth through argument, demonstration, or personal persuasion that creates spiritual pride and mental confusion. Goldsmith emphasized that consciousness recognition cannot be taught through intellectual explanation or emotional inspiration. It must be recognized individually through direct spiritual experience that transcends mental understanding and emotional conviction about truth. Your role is simply to live from consciousness recognition and allow others to recognize truth for themselves when they are spiritually ready. Forcing spiritual understanding on others actually interferes with their natural awakening process and creates resistance. The most effective spiritual teaching occurs through silent recognition of others' true identity as consciousness rather than verbal instruction or demonstration. This creates spiritual atmosphere where recognition can emerge naturally without personal interference or manipulation. Your entire understanding of God is now transformed from external deity to recognized consciousness, expressing as your very being. This recognition dissolves the separation that created every limitation, problem, and spiritual seeking in your experience throughout life. Prayer becomes communion with your own divine nature, rather than petitioning outside authority. Healing emerges through recognition of wholeness rather than treatment of problems. Abundance flows as consciousness expressing supply rather than acquisition of material possessions. This isn't the end of your spiritual journey, but the beginning of authentic spiritual living. Every day offers opportunities to deepen recognition and discover new dimensions of consciousness expressing through relationships, activities, and circumstances. If your spiritual understanding expanded through these Joel Goldsmith secrets, like this video, subscribe for more transformative teachings, and comment, "I am transformed," to confirm your new path. What if I told you that Joel Goldsmith discovered 4 simple words that transformed thousands of lives, healed the incurable, and opened doors to miracles that medical science couldn't explain? These aren't magic words or religious incantations. They're based on a profound spiritual principle that Goldsmith spent decades perfecting. He used them to heal tuberculosis, cancer, financial ruin, and broken relationships when nothing else worked. The results were so consistent that skeptics called them impossible. But here's what made Goldsmith different from other healers. He understood that true healing happens not through force or struggle, but through a complete shift in consciousness. He discovered that when you align with divine principle, miracles become natural. These 4 words contain the essence of mystical Christianity and practical metaphysics. They've been tested by thousands of students worldwide, and today you'll learn exactly how to use them in your own life for transformation you never thought possible. The 4 words are deceptively simple: I and the Father. But before you dismiss them as too basic, understand that Goldsmith discovered these words contain the entire secret of spiritual power. They represent the most profound realization in human consciousness. Most people live believing they're separate from divine source, struggling against circumstances, fighting for survival. This separation consciousness creates every problem you face. Illness, lack, fear, relationship conflicts. It's the root of all human suffering. But when Jesus said, "I and the Father are one," he revealed the fundamental truth of existence. Goldsmith understood that this wasn't just Jesus speaking. It was the divine nature speaking through human consciousness. It's your true identity speaking. When you truly grasp I and the Father, something revolutionary happens in your consciousness. The sense of separation dissolves. You stop fighting life and start flowing with divine principle. This shift alone has healed conditions that doctors pronounced incurable. Here's how Goldsmith applied these words in practice. When faced with any challenge, physical, emotional, or material, he wouldn't try to fix the problem directly. Instead, he'd return to the consciousness of I and the Father are one. He understood that problems exist only in separation consciousness. In the awareness of oneness with divine source, there can be no lack, no disease, no limitation. Not because you're denying the appearance, but because you're recognizing what's true at the deepest level. This isn't positive thinking or wishful believing. It's recognizing the spiritual reality that underlies all existence. When your consciousness aligns with this truth, outer conditions naturally harmonize. It's as automatic as light dispelling darkness. Goldsmith proved this principle thousands of times. A woman with terminal cancer meditated on I and the Father until she felt the truth of it. 6 months later, doctors found no trace of disease. Her consciousness had shifted from separation to wholeness. The power isn't in the words themselves, it's in the consciousness they awaken. When you really feel I and the Father are one, you're not affirming something you hope is true. You're recognizing what has always been true, but was hidden by false beliefs. This recognition changes everything. Instead of being a powerless human pleading with God for help, you realize your divine consciousness expressing as individual being. The source of all good isn't outside you. It's the very essence of what you are. Goldsmith called this dying to humanhood and being reborn as spiritual consciousness. It sounds mystical, but it's actually the most practical thing you can do. Every problem you face exists only because you've forgotten your true identity. When a businessman was facing bankruptcy, Goldsmith taught him to meditate on these words until he felt his oneness with infinite intelligence. Within weeks, unexpected opportunities appeared, and his business flourished beyond previous success. Let me share how Margaret discovered this principle during her darkest hour. She'd been suffering from rheumatoid arthritis for 12 years. Her joints were so inflamed she could barely dress herself. 3 specialists told her the condition would only worsen with age. In desperation, she attended one of Goldsmith's lectures. When he explained, I and the Father are one, something stirred in her consciousness. She realized she'd been seeing herself as a victim of circumstances, separate from divine healing power. That night, she sat quietly and contemplated these words. Not as a desperate plea, but as a recognition of truth. I and the Father are one meant her true nature was already whole, already perfect, already free from limitation. Over the following weeks, she practiced returning to this awareness whenever pain or fear arose. Gradually, inflammation decreased. Movement became easier. Within 6 months, her doctor pronounced her completely healed, with no explanation for the transformation. David's story reveals how these words transform financial limitation. He was a talented architect who couldn't find steady work. Bill collectors called daily. His family faced losing their home. Every door seemed closed, every opportunity blocked. When he heard about Goldsmith's principle, David was skeptical. How could 4 words change practical circumstances? But desperation made him willing to try anything. He began each day contemplating, I and the Father are one. Slowly his consciousness shifted. Instead of seeing himself as unemployed and desperate, he began recognizing his oneness with infinite intelligence and creativity. He felt guided to approach firms he'd previously overlooked. Within 3 months, not only did he secure a position, but 2 firms competed for his services. His new salary exceeded his previous income by 40%. The same creative intelligence that was always present had simply found expression through his transformed consciousness. Sarah's marriage was ending after 23 years. Her husband had become distant and critical. They barely spoke without arguing. Divorce seemed inevitable. She felt like a failure, convinced she'd lost the ability to love or be loved. Through a friend's recommendation, she discovered Goldsmith's teachings. The idea that I and the Father are one initially seemed irrelevant to her relationship problems. How could spiritual consciousness heal a broken marriage? But as Sarah practiced this awareness, something profound shifted. She stopped seeing herself as a wounded wife and began recognizing her true nature as divine love expressing. This wasn't denial of problems. It was remembering her essential wholeness. As her consciousness changed, her entire approach to the relationship transformed. She became less reactive, more compassionate, naturally expressing the love that was her true nature. Her husband noticed the change and began responding differently. Today, they describe their marriage as stronger than ever. These transformations aren't accidents or coincidences. They demonstrate a spiritual principle that Goldsmith spent his life teaching. When consciousness changes, conditions change. Not through manipulation or force, but through alignment with divine law. The secret lies in understanding that your true identity isn't the struggling human personality. It's divine consciousness individualized. When you really grasp, I and the Father are one, you stop trying to get things from God and start expressing as God's presence. This shift from seeking to being changes everything. Health, prosperity, loving relationships aren't things you acquire. They're the natural expression of your true nature when false beliefs no longer obstruct the flow. If these transformation stories inspire you, like this video to help others find these teachings, subscribe for more Joel Goldsmith wisdom, and comment, what healing journey resonated most with you? Beyond the basic principle, Goldsmith developed specific techniques to deepen this realization. The first is what he called the practice of the presence. This means regularly returning to the awareness of I and the Father are one throughout your day. Set aside time each morning to contemplate this truth, not as something you're trying to make happen, but as recognition of what already is. Feel the reality of your oneness with infinite intelligence, love, and creative power. Then, during daily activities, whenever you feel stressed, fearful, or limited, pause and return to this awareness. Don't try to solve the specific problem. Return to the consciousness of wholeness. Let divine intelligence work through your transformed awareness. This isn't escapism from practical responsibilities. It's the most practical approach possible because it addresses the consciousness that creates all outer experiences. Change consciousness, and circumstances naturally align with that new awareness. Goldsmith also taught treatment through recognition. When facing any challenge, instead of seeing it as a problem to solve, recognize it as an invitation to remember your true identity. Every difficulty becomes an opportunity for deeper spiritual realization. If illness appears, don't fight the disease. Recognize the consciousness that knows no sickness. If lack manifests, don't struggle for supply. Realize your oneness with infinite abundance. If relationships suffer, remember your nature as divine love. This approach seems backwards to human thinking, but it's based on spiritual law. The appearance world is effect. Consciousness is cause. When you change consciousness at the causal level, effects naturally transform to match. A student applied this when her son was arrested for drug possession. Instead of panicking or trying to control outcomes, she recognized the truth. I and my Father are one, and this oneness includes my son. She held to this awareness while taking practical legal steps. The third technique Goldsmith emphasized is living from the invisible. Most people live from appearances, what they see, hear, and feel through physical senses. But spiritual consciousness lives from the invisible realm of truth that underlies all appearances. When you know I and the Father are one, you're not denying what appears to be happening. You're recognizing the deeper reality that transcends appearances. You make decisions from spiritual discernment rather than emotional reaction to circumstances. This doesn't mean ignoring practical responsibilities or avoiding necessary action. It means acting from consciousness of wholeness rather than consciousness of limitation. Your actions become expressions of divine intelligence rather than human struggling. A business owner facing potential bankruptcy applied this principle. Instead of making decisions from fear and desperation, he regularly returned to awareness of his oneness with infinite intelligence. Guided by this consciousness, he made strategic changes that not only saved his company, but increased profits. The fourth technique is what Goldsmith called impersonal love. This means recognizing that the love, wisdom, and power flowing through your consciousness isn't personal to you. It's divine principle, expressing as you and through you to bless all creation. When you understand, I and the Father are one, you realize you're not a separate individual trying to get good things for yourself. Your divine consciousness, individualized for the purpose of expressing infinite good. This shifts motivation from self-serving to service. Paradoxically, this impersonal approach brings more harmony to personal experience. When you stop trying to manipulate outcomes for personal benefit and instead become a clear channel for divine expression, life flows with unprecedented ease and abundance. A healer discovered this when she stopped trying to heal people through personal effort and instead recognized divine love flowing through her consciousness. Her effectiveness increased dramatically because she was no longer interfering with spiritual principle through personal will and effort. Now let's address the challenges you'll likely encounter when applying these principles. The biggest obstacle is the human mind's resistance to letting go of separation consciousness. Your ego mind has been programmed to believe in struggle and limitation. When you first begin practicing I and the Father are one, your mind may rebel with thoughts like, this isn't realistic, or nothing is changing. This resistance is normal. It's the old consciousness defending itself against transformation. Don't fight these thoughts or judge yourself for having them. Simply acknowledge them without giving them power. Then gently return to the awareness of oneness. Think of it like training a muscle. Each return to truth strengthens your spiritual consciousness. Remember that Goldsmith himself struggled with this principle for years before experiencing consistent results. Spiritual realization isn't usually instantaneous. It's a gradual awakening that deepens through faithful practice and patient persistence. Another common challenge is the temptation to use this principle as a technique to get what you want rather than as recognition of what you are. If you approach I and the Father are one as a method to manipulate outcomes, you're still operating from separation consciousness. The power lies not in using these words to change circumstances, but in letting them transform your understanding of identity. When you truly realize your oneness with divine source, right action and harmonious conditions naturally follow. This distinction is crucial. If you're practicing this principle to heal a specific condition, attract a particular relationship, or solve a financial problem, you're missing the deeper truth. The practice is about remembering who you really are. One of Goldsmith's students struggled with this until she realized she was trying to use spiritual principle like a cosmic vending machine. When she shifted to genuine recognition of her divine nature without attachment to specific outcomes, her life transformed in ways beyond her imagination. Impatience is another significant obstacle. In our instant gratification culture, we expect immediate results from spiritual practice. But consciousness transformation operates according to spiritual law, not human timeline. Trust the process even when changes aren't immediately visible. Goldsmith often reminded students that spiritual realization is like pregnancy. There's a gestation period before manifestation appears. Your faithful recognition of I and the Father are one is doing invisible work in consciousness that will eventually bear visible fruit. Sometimes the most important changes happen first in your inner experience. Increased peace, clarity, confidence, compassion. These shifts in consciousness are more valuable than external changes because they're the foundation from which all harmonious experiences flow. A woman practiced this principle for months before seeing dramatic outer changes, but she noticed growing inner stability and wisdom that enabled her to handle challenges with unprecedented grace. Later, this inner transformation manifested as career advancement and relationship healing. The final challenge is doubt when facing serious difficulties. When confronted with major illness, financial crisis, or relationship breakdown, it's easy to think, this spiritual stuff doesn't work for real problems. This doubt can undermine your practice just when persistence is most crucial. Goldsmith faced this challenge when his wife was diagnosed with tuberculosis. Medical treatment had failed, and doctors offered no hope. In that dark moment, he could have abandoned spiritual principle, but instead, he deepened his practice of oneness consciousness. He spent hours in meditation, not trying to heal his wife, but recognizing the truth that in divine consciousness, there is no separation, no disease, no death. He held to this awareness despite overwhelming appearances to the contrary. His wife recovered completely, but more importantly, Goldsmith realized that spiritual principle is most powerful exactly when human resources are exhausted. Your greatest challenges become opportunities for the deepest spiritual realization. If these challenge-breaking techniques speak to your heart, like to support this content, subscribe for advanced spiritual practices, and comment. Which obstacle are you ready to transform now? Advanced practitioners learn to integrate I and the Father are one into daily activities rather than limiting it to formal meditation periods. This constant awareness transforms ordinary activities into spiritual practice and every moment into opportunity for deeper realization. Begin by practicing presence during routine activities, washing dishes, driving, walking. Instead of letting your mind wander to problems or plans, maintain awareness of your oneness with divine intelligence. Feel this consciousness flowing through your actions. This practice gradually dissolves the artificial separation between spiritual time and ordinary time. You begin to live from the consciousness of oneness rather than just thinking about it during designated prayer periods. A busy executive found that maintaining this awareness during meetings, phone calls, and decision-making transformed her effectiveness. Colleagues noticed her increased wisdom and calm authority. Business results improved because divine intelligence was flowing through her professional activities. Goldsmith taught that genuine spiritual realization naturally expresses as practical wisdom in human affairs. When you truly know I and the Father are one, you don't withdraw from worldly responsibilities. You fulfill them from a consciousness of infinite intelligence and love. This might mean making business decisions from spiritual discernment rather than fear or greed. It could involve parenting from awareness of each child's divine nature, rather than controlling behavior through manipulation or threats. Your relationships transform when you stop seeing others as separate personalities who can fulfill or disappoint you, and start recognizing divine consciousness expressing as each individual. This doesn't make you passive. It makes you genuinely helpful. A marriage counselor discovered that when she held awareness of I and the Father are one during sessions, both spouses naturally found solutions that had eluded them for years. Divine wisdom was flowing through her consciousness to bless their relationship. Financial abundance becomes natural when you understand that your supply comes from consciousness rather than external sources. I and the Father are one means you're connected to the infinite intelligence and creativity that is the source of all good. This doesn't mean sitting in meditation expecting money to fall from the sky. It means bringing consciousness of infinite abundance to your work, investments, and business decisions. You act from awareness of limitless possibility rather than fear of scarcity. Your value in the marketplace increases when you offer your skills and talents as expressions of divine intelligence rather than desperate attempts to survive. People sense the difference and naturally respond with greater appreciation and compensation. An artist struggled financially until she began creating from consciousness of her oneness with infinite creativity. Her work took on new depth and power that resonated with viewers. Gallery sales increased dramatically because divine beauty was expressing through her consciousness. Physical healing advances when you understand that your true body is spiritual, not material. The physical form is the expression of consciousness, so transformed consciousness naturally produces transformed physical experience. This doesn't mean denying the appearance of illness or avoiding medical care when appropriate. It means recognizing that your essential nature is wholeness itself, and this recognition creates the consciousness in which healing naturally occurs. Goldsmith healed numerous conditions by maintaining awareness that in divine consciousness there is no discord, no degeneration, no limitation. He didn't fight disease. He recognized the spiritual reality that transcends physical appearances. A man with heart disease practiced this principle alongside medical treatment. As his consciousness shifted from identifying with a diseased body to recognizing his spiritual wholeness, His cardiologist documented remarkable improvement that exceeded medical expectations. The ultimate realization is that I and the Father are one isn't a technique you practice. It's the truth you are. When this recognition becomes stable, you stop trying to become spiritual and start living as the spiritual being you've always been. This shift from doing to being marks spiritual maturity. Instead of working to achieve oneness with God, you recognize the oneness that has always existed. Instead of seeking to acquire divine qualities, you express the divine nature that is your essence. Life becomes effortless flow rather than constant struggle. Challenges still appear, but you meet them from consciousness of infinite wisdom and power rather than human limitation. Solutions appear naturally because divine intelligence is your intelligence. A teacher reached this understanding after years of practice. She stopped trying to be spiritual and simply lived from the awareness of her divine nature. Students noticed the change immediately. Her words carried new authority and love that transformed lives effortlessly. At this level of realization, service becomes natural expression rather than imposed duty. When you know your oneness with infinite love, you spontaneously bless others not from personal effort, but as divine love flowing through your consciousness. Your very presence becomes healing because you're no longer projecting human fears and limitations. People feel safe and elevated in your company because they're sensing divine consciousness expressing as your individual being. This isn't superiority or special status. It's the natural result of recognizing what you truly are. Every human being has this same divine nature, and your realization helps awaken this truth in others through silent recognition rather than preaching. Goldsmith's advanced students reported that simply being in his presence brought healing and peace. This wasn't personality magnetism. It was divine consciousness recognizing itself through his transformed awareness and awakening similar recognition in others. The practical result of sustained practice is what Goldsmith called living the illumined life. This means your daily experience naturally reflects spiritual principles without conscious effort to make it happen. Health, abundance, loving relationships, meaningful work, and inner peace become your normal experience, not because you've manipulated conditions, but because your consciousness aligns with divine harmony. You live from your spiritual center rather than reactive human nature. Problems still arise, but you handle them from wisdom rather than fear, love rather than resentment, confidence rather than anxiety. Your responses naturally dissolve difficulties rather than creating additional conflict. This illumined living is available to anyone willing to persistently practice the recognition that I and the Father are one. It's not reserved for special people. It's the natural result of remembering your true identity and living from that awareness. You now possess the key that unlocked thousands of healings and transformations through Joel Goldsmith's ministry. These 4 words, I and the Father, contain infinite power when recognized as the truth of your being rather than wishful thinking. Your spiritual journey doesn't end with understanding this principle. It begins. Each day offers new opportunities to deepen this realization and express your divine nature more fully. Every challenge becomes an invitation to remember who you really are. Start today with just 5 minutes of quiet contemplation. Feel the truth that you and Divine Source are one. Let this awareness guide your thoughts, words, and actions. Trust that spiritual law will manifest harmony as your consciousness embodies this truth. If your spiritual understanding expanded through these Joel Goldsmith secrets, like this video, subscribe for more transformative teachings, and comment, I am transformed, to confirm your new path. In 1943, Joel Goldsmith stood at the edge of complete spiritual collapse. The man who would become Christianity's greatest mystical healer was making the exact same devastating mistake you're making right now. He was desperately trying to heal with his human mind instead of resting in divine consciousness. This single error nearly destroyed his spiritual mission before it truly began. For agonizing months, Joel struggled with repeated failures, mounting doubts, and the growing horrifying realization that everything he thought he knew about spiritual healing was completely wrong. His personal human will was actively fighting against divine grace. But in one life-changing, transformative moment of complete surrender, Joel discovered the revolutionary secret that changed absolutely everything. He stopped trying to make something happen through human effort and started allowing something divine to happen through spiritual receptivity. This dramatic shift from mental effort to spiritual receptivity became the unshakable foundation of mystical Christianity. Today, I'm going to reveal exactly what Joel learned in that moment of crisis, because you're making the same mistake that almost cost him everything. And it's costing you your spiritual power right now. The mistake Joel made is the exact same mistake every sincere spiritual seeker makes without exception. We desperately try to use our limited personal will to access unlimited divine power. We pray harder, affirm louder, visualize clearer, thinking that more human effort automatically equals more spiritual results. But Joel discovered that spiritual law works in complete opposition to human logic. The moment he stopped trying to heal anyone, genuine healing happened effortlessly. The instant he stopped trying to demonstrate supply, true abundance flowed naturally. When he ceased trying to find God, God found him immediately. This wasn't giving up in defeat. It was giving in to a higher intelligence that already knew the perfect solution. The secret Joel uncovered was this revolutionary truth. Your consciousness, not your thinking mind, is the only true instrument of divine expression in the material world. Your mind thinks, plans, worries, and struggles constantly. Your consciousness simply receives, allows, and expresses divine perfection naturally. One fights desperately against divine order. The other aligns perfectly with infinite intelligence and allows miracles to unfold. Here's exactly what Joel realized about the profound difference between consciousness and mental effort that changes everything. When you try to heal with your thinking mind, you're attempting to use limited personal power to accomplish unlimited spiritual work. It's like trying to lift yourself off the ground by pulling on your own bootstraps. The harder you try through human effort, the more spiritually exhausted you become, and the further you move from actual divine demonstration. But when you work directly from consciousness, you become a perfect transparency for unlimited divine action to flow through you without any personal interference whatsoever. You don't heal anyone through personal effort. You don't demonstrate anything through human will. You simply maintain the pure consciousness of spiritual wholeness, and wholeness appears automatically in human experience. You hold the consciousness of infinite abundance, and divine supply manifests naturally. Joel called this the crucial difference between taking anxious thought and being established in spiritual consciousness. Taking thought is frantic mental activity, endless planning, constant worrying, desperately trying to make something happen through personal force. Being in consciousness is resting peacefully in eternal spiritual truth, knowing with absolute certainty that I am is the only real power present in every situation. This isn't passive resignation or spiritual laziness. It's active receptivity that allows unlimited divine intelligence to work through you completely unobstructed. You're not doing nothing spiritually. You're allowing everything divine to flow through your consciousness as perfect human experience. And that fundamental shift makes all the difference between spiritual struggle and effortless demonstration of divine harmony in your daily life. The practical application of Joel's revolutionary discovery changes absolutely everything about how you approach any spiritual work. Instead of trying to heal a persistent headache, you recognize that in pure consciousness, there simply is no headache, because perfection is the only reality. Instead of trying to demonstrate money through human effort, you rest completely in the consciousness that I am is infinite supply itself, appearing as your every need fulfilled perfectly. You stop fighting against problems and start ignoring them from the higher perspective of spiritual truth. Let me share a powerful story that proves Joel's consciousness approach works even in the most challenging circumstances imaginable. Maria was a devoted spiritual student who had been struggling with chronic debilitating pain for many years. She had tried every healing method available, attended every service regularly, read every spiritual book, but nothing changed in her condition despite years of sincere spiritual effort. Maria was making Joel's original devastating mistake. She was using her thinking mind to try to heal her physical body, affirming health while secretly believing in sickness, declaring wholeness while experiencing constant pain. Her desperate mental effort was actually reinforcing the very condition she wanted to heal most. Then Maria learned Joel's revolutionary secret of consciousness. Instead of trying to heal her persistent pain, She began to rest completely in the consciousness that God is the only presence and power. She stopped trying to make her body well through human effort and started recognizing that in spiritual reality, she had never actually been sick. She withdrew all spiritual reality from the appearance of sickness and rested in the truth of divine perfection. Within just a few weeks of this new approach, the chronic pain began to diminish noticeably. Within several months, it was completely gone forever. But here's what's absolutely crucial for your understanding. Maria didn't heal her body through personal effort. She stopped believing her body needed healing. She withdrew spiritual reality from the appearance of sickness and rested in the eternal truth of divine wholeness. Another student of Joel's consciousness principles, Robert, was facing complete financial collapse. His business was failing rapidly, debts were mounting dangerously, and paralyzing fear was consuming his thoughts. Like Joel in 1943, Robert was desperately trying to use spiritual principles to fix material problems through human effort. Robert spent many hours each day affirming abundance, visualizing success, and trying to demonstrate prosperity through mental concentration and personal will. But the harder he tried through human effort, the worse his financial situation became. His frantic mental effort was operating from the fundamental belief that he lacked something essential that needed to be obtained through personal struggle. When Robert learned to properly apply Joel's consciousness technique, everything shifted dramatically. Instead of trying to get money through human effort, he began to rest completely in the consciousness that I am is infinite supply itself. He stopped seeing himself as poor and started recognizing his true divine nature as abundance itself. The transformation took several months of consistent practice, but it was absolutely complete. Business opportunities appeared unexpectedly, debts resolved mysteriously, and abundance flowed naturally without personal effort. Robert had discovered that consciousness of supply is supply itself, not merely the avenue to supply. Sarah's marriage was on the brink of divorce when she discovered Joel's transformative teachings. Her husband was emotionally distant, communication had completely broken down, and both were ready to give up entirely. Sarah had been praying desperately for her marriage to be healed, but her prayers were filled with fear and desperation rather than spiritual consciousness. Sarah was trying to heal her relationship through mental effort and emotional pleading. She was seeing her marriage as broken and trying to fix it through spiritual techniques applied with human will. This approach was actually reinforcing the appearance of separation and discord in her relationship. When Sarah learned Joel's consciousness method, she stopped trying to heal her marriage through personal effort and started recognizing the spiritual reality of divine love as the only true presence. She ceased seeing her husband as unloving and began to know him as the perfect expression of divine love itself. The change in their relationship was gradual but absolutely profound. As Sarah maintained the consciousness of divine love, her husband began to respond completely differently. Communication improved naturally, intimacy returned spontaneously, and their marriage became stronger than ever before. These transformation stories reveal the unlimited power of Joel's consciousness technique. When you stop trying to change appearances and start recognizing spiritual reality, appearances change automatically. If these transformation stories inspire you, like this video to help others find these teachings, subscribe for more Joel Goldsmith wisdom, and comment. What healing journey resonated most with you? Beyond Joel's foundational consciousness technique, there are powerful complementary practices that significantly deepen your spiritual receptivity and accelerate your spiritual development. The first is what Joel called practicing the presence of God continuously throughout your daily activities and experiences. Instead of turning to God only when serious problems arise, you cultivate continuous recognition of divine presence in every moment. While working, you know with certainty that I am is the infinite intelligence expressing perfectly through all your activities and accomplishments. While resting, you recognize that divine peace is your natural permanent state of being. This transformative practice turns ordinary moments into sacred experiences. You're not trying to bring God into your separate life. You're recognizing that God is already the very life you're living. This recognition gradually dissolves the fundamental sense of separation from God that creates most human problems and limitations. The beauty of practicing the presence is that it requires no special time, place, or circumstances. Every single moment becomes a precious opportunity to recognize spiritual reality. The second powerful complementary technique Joel taught is going within for specific divine guidance whenever you face important decisions or challenging circumstances. Instead of trying to figure out what to do through human reasoning, you turn within to receive perfect divine direction. This isn't asking God to tell you what to do as if you were separate from divine intelligence. It's recognizing that divine intelligence is actually your own true intelligence operating. You quiet the personal thinking mind, rest in the consciousness of I am, and allow the perfect answer to unfold naturally. Sometimes divine guidance comes as a clear inner knowing, sometimes as an intuitive feeling, sometimes as circumstances that naturally open or close opportunities. The key is trusting completely that divine intelligence knows exactly what you need to know precisely when you need to know it. Joel emphasized that this inner guidance is always available without exception, but it can only be received in consciousness, never accessed through mental effort or personal struggle. The quieter your thinking mind becomes, the clearer divine direction flows. The third essential technique Joel used is releasing personal sense completely in every situation. Personal sense is the false belief that you are a separate individual who must protect, provide for, and heal yourself through personal effort and human struggle. This limiting belief blocks the natural flow of divine grace through your human experience. When you release personal sense completely, you stop trying to be the doer and recognize I am as the only true actor in every situation. You cease trying to live your life through personal will and allow divine life to live itself perfectly as your experience. This isn't becoming passive or irresponsible. It's becoming completely transparent to infinite divine activity expressing through you naturally. Joel taught that every human problem stems from personal sense trying to handle what only divine consciousness can resolve perfectly. When you release the belief that you must handle anything personally, divine handling appears automatically and effortlessly in your experience. This release happens gradually through consistent daily practice and growing spiritual understanding. Each time you catch yourself trying to handle something through personal effort, you pause immediately, release it completely to divine consciousness, and rest in the awareness that I am knows exactly what to do. These three complementary techniques work together harmoniously to establish what Joel called the consciousness of I am. This isn't a belief or a thought, it's a living awareness that divine being is your being, divine consciousness is your consciousness, divine life is your life. When this consciousness becomes firmly established through practice, you naturally stop making the mistake that almost destroyed Joel. You cease trying to use spiritual principles to improve human conditions and start recognizing that spiritual reality is the only true reality. This recognition transforms everything without any personal effort whatsoever. Health appears because you know yourself as the expression of divine wholeness. Abundance flows because you recognize yourself as infinite supply. Love expresses because you know yourself as divine love itself. Even with clear understanding of Joel's teachings, many sincere students face common obstacles that can seriously derail their spiritual progress. The first major obstacle is impatience with the gradual process of spiritual unfoldment. You desperately want immediate dramatic results, but consciousness develops gradually through consistent practice. Joel himself experienced this challenging obstacle during his early years of spiritual development. He would practice the presence faithfully for days or weeks, then become deeply discouraged when dramatic healing didn't occur immediately. This impatience actually interfered with the natural unfoldment of consciousness. The solution is understanding that every single moment of recognition, every instance of resting in consciousness, is building powerful spiritual momentum that will eventually demonstrate in human experience. You may not see immediate changes in outer appearances, but consciousness is establishing itself more firmly with each sincere practice. Trust completely that divine timing is always perfect timing. Some demonstrations happen quickly, others unfold slowly over time. Your only work is to maintain consciousness regardless of appearances. The second common obstacle is mixing spiritual consciousness with personal mental effort. You'll catch yourself practicing Joel's techniques correctly, then slipping back into trying to make something happen through personal will and human effort. This mixture seriously dilutes the effectiveness of consciousness. Joel warned against this spiritual confusion repeatedly. He taught that you cannot serve two masters simultaneously. Either you're resting peacefully in consciousness, or you're working from personal effort, but you cannot do both at the same time effectively. The mixture creates internal conflict and significantly delays demonstration of harmony. When you notice yourself trying to help consciousness along through mental effort, simply stop immediately and return to complete rest in spiritual truth. Release whatever you were trying to accomplish through personal will and re-establish your awareness in the truth of I Am as the only power and presence. This is not spiritual failure. It's simply part of the natural learning process that every student experiences. The third obstacle is expecting consciousness to work according to your personal timeline and preferences. You may desperately want healing to appear in your physical body, but consciousness expresses as improved relationships. You may expect supply through your current job, but abundance comes through completely unexpected channels. Joel learned that consciousness always demonstrates perfectly, but never according to limited personal expectations. Divine intelligence knows the perfect form of expression for each situation, and this form may be completely different from what the human mind anticipates or desires. Your role is to maintain consciousness faithfully and allow divine intelligence to choose the perfect form of expression. When you insist on specific outcomes, you severely limit the infinite ways that consciousness can manifest in your experience. Trust completely that whatever consciousness produces is exactly what you need, even if it's not what you personally wanted. Divine wisdom sees the complete picture and always provides the highest good for all concerned. The final common obstacle is using Joel's techniques to improve personal sense instead of dissolving it completely. This happens when you practice consciousness in order to get a better human experience rather than recognizing your true divine nature. Joel taught that the real purpose of spiritual practice is not to improve the human, but to realize that the divine is the only identity you actually have. When you use consciousness to get better health, more money, or improved relationships, you're still operating from personal sense. True spiritual practice involves recognizing that you are already whole, abundant, and loved in consciousness. The purpose of Joel's techniques is to rest in this recognition, not to achieve it through effort. This recognition then appears as improved human experiences automatically. If these challenge-breaking techniques speak to your heart, like to support this content, subscribe for advanced spiritual practices, and comment. Which obstacle are you ready to transform now? Advanced application of Joel's teachings involves integrating consciousness into the most challenging areas of daily life. Take your work situation as a perfect example. Instead of seeing your job as separate from spiritual life, you recognize that I Am is the intelligence, skill, and supply expressing through your career. This doesn't mean becoming passive about career development or professional growth. It means approaching work from consciousness rather than personal ambition and ego. You do your absolute best while knowing that divine intelligence is the true doer. You provide excellent service while recognizing that I Am is the server. When workplace challenges arise, instead of fighting them mentally or emotionally, you turn immediately to consciousness. You recognize that divine harmony is the only law operating, regardless of outer appearances. This consciousness often dissolves conflicts before they fully develop into serious problems. One student applied this approach during a major corporate restructuring that threatened her position. Instead of fighting the changes through human effort, she maintained consciousness of divine order operating perfectly. She was promoted to a significantly better position, while many others were let go during the restructuring. Family relationships provide another challenging arena for advanced consciousness practice. When family members trigger old emotional patterns or create difficult challenges, instead of reacting personally, you turn to consciousness. You recognize divine love expressing through every individual, regardless of their current behavior or attitudes. This doesn't mean accepting inappropriate behavior or enabling dysfunction. It means seeing through the human appearance to the divine reality of every person, while taking appropriate human action when necessary for protection or boundaries. Joel taught that when you consistently see others from consciousness rather than personal judgment, they begin to express their divine nature more clearly in your experience. Your consciousness of their spiritual perfection calls forth their perfection and dissolves discord. One practitioner used this approach with her alcoholic brother, who had been destroying his life for years. Instead of trying to change him through human effort, she held the consciousness of his divine wholeness. Over several months of consistent practice, he sought treatment voluntarily and recovered completely. Health challenges offer perhaps the most demanding arena for consciousness practice. When symptoms appear or medical diagnoses are given, the natural temptation is to fight the condition mentally or try to heal the body through spiritual effort. Joel's approach is radically different from conventional spiritual healing methods. Instead of seeing yourself as sick and trying to become well through effort, you recognize that in consciousness, wholeness is your permanent, unchanging nature. You don't deny what appears to be happening in human experience, but you refuse to give it spiritual reality or power. This practice requires consistent return to consciousness whenever fear or symptoms try to claim your attention and disturb your peace. You acknowledge what appears to be happening while resting firmly in the knowledge of what is actually true spiritually. A longtime student faced a serious cancer diagnosis that appeared life-threatening. Instead of fighting the disease through human effort, she maintained consciousness of her divine wholeness. The cancer completely disappeared within months, but more importantly, she discovered unshakable peace regardless of physical appearances. Financial challenges provide another opportunity for advanced consciousness practice. When bills mount or income decreases, instead of struggling to get more money through human effort, you rest in consciousness. You recognize that I Am is infinite supply, appearing as your daily needs perfectly met. This approach seems completely impractical to the human mind, but Joel proved its effectiveness throughout his entire ministry. He never asked for money, yet always had abundant supply. He rested in consciousness and allowed divine supply to appear naturally. You practice this by releasing financial concerns to consciousness while taking appropriate human steps. You pay bills, seek employment, and manage resources wisely, but you do these things from consciousness rather than fear. One practitioner applied this during extended unemployment. Instead of desperately seeking work through human effort, he maintained consciousness of divine intelligence expressing through his career. The perfect position appeared with better pay and conditions than his previous job. As consciousness becomes firmly established through consistent practice, you begin to experience what Joel called the mystical life. This is life lived from constant awareness of your divine nature rather than personal sense of separation from God. In the mystical life, problems don't disappear from human experience, but your relationship to them transforms completely. Challenges become opportunities to deepen consciousness. Difficulties become invitations to release more personal sense and rest more completely in I Am. You discover that external harmony is not the ultimate goal of spiritual practice. Internal recognition of truth is the goal. When you know yourself as consciousness itself, external appearances lose their power to disturb your peace or diminish your joy. This doesn't mean becoming indifferent to human experience or withdrawing from life. It means experiencing human life from the perspective of consciousness rather than personal sense. You engage fully in life while remaining spiritually free from personal attachment to outcomes. The mystical life transforms your entire approach to helping others spiritually. Instead of trying to heal people or solve their problems through human effort, you maintain consciousness of their divine wholeness and allow that recognition to bless their experience naturally. Joel discovered that the most effective healing work happens when you completely forget about the person's problem and rest in the consciousness of God's presence. Your consciousness becomes a perfect transparency for divine love to touch their experience. This approach requires releasing all personal responsibility for others, while remaining available to serve as consciousness directs. You don't fix anyone through human effort, but you hold the consciousness that allows divine fixing to occur naturally. Many students find this the most challenging aspect of mystical living. Personal sense desperately wants to help through human effort, but consciousness serves through divine being. Learning this crucial difference transforms both your service and your effectiveness in helping others experience healing. After decades of consistent practice, advanced students discover what Joel called the natural life. This is living from consciousness so consistently that it becomes completely effortless. You no longer have to remember to practice the presence, you simply live as presence itself. The techniques that once required discipline become natural as breathing. Recognizing I Am becomes as automatic as physical breathing. Resting in consciousness becomes your normal state rather than something you do during spiritual practice times. In this natural life, the mistake that almost destroyed Joel becomes completely impossible. You couldn't try to use personal will for spiritual work because personal will has dissolved into divine will. You couldn't make spiritual effort because consciousness has become your effortless nature. This is not a distant goal, but a present possibility available right now. Every moment you rest in consciousness instead of personal effort, you're living the natural life. Every instance of recognizing I am instead of trying to become something, you're expressing mystical consciousness. You now understand the mistake that almost destroyed Joel Goldsmith and how it's been destroying your spiritual effectiveness. You've learned the secret that transformed his crisis into his greatest discovery. Consciousness, not effort, is the key to spiritual demonstration. The path forward is clear, but requires unwavering commitment. Stop trying to use spiritual techniques to improve human conditions through personal effort. Start resting in the consciousness that recognizes spiritual reality as the only true reality. Let this recognition transform your experience naturally. Remember, you are not a human being seeking a spiritual experience through effort. You are consciousness itself, appearing as human experience. When this recognition becomes firmly established, everything Joel taught becomes your natural expression, and his mistake becomes impossible to make. Begin today by choosing consciousness over effort in one specific area of your life. Rest in I am instead of trying to become something. Allow divine intelligence to handle what personal will cannot accomplish. Your transformation starts with this choice. If your spiritual understanding expanded through these Joel Goldsmith secrets, like this video, subscribe for more transformative teachings, and comment, I am transformed, to confirm your new path.